I stood there 3 days before my wedding, looking at a room full of people who were supposed to become my family, and realizing I had never actually been welcome for even a second. I can still remember how calm I looked in that moment, not because I wasn't breaking inside, but because something in me had already gone quiet. Like my emotions had stepped back just enough to let me see everything clearly for the first time. They had invited me to their estate that day, under the excuse of a simple formality. That's exactly what his mother called it on the phone. A formality, like I was just there to sign something small, harmless, routine. But nothing about that house was harmless. Nothing about that family was simple. The moment I walked into that marble dining room, I understood I wasn't there to be welcomed. I was there to be assessed. His parents didn't look at me like a future daughter-in-law. They looked at me like a problem they were trying to solve, something temporary, something uncertain, something they had already decided didn't belong, and then they slid it across the table. The prenup. Not a discussion, not a conversation, a document designed to strip everything away before I even had a chance to become part of anything. Every clause felt like it had been written to remind me exactly where I stood in their world, and it wasn't beside them, it was beneath them. His mother smiled while she did it. His father watched in silence like it was business being handled properly, and the man I thought I was going to marry just sat there, quiet, avoiding my eyes, not defending me, not questioning anything. Just present enough to witness it, but not strong enough to stop it. That was the moment something in me shifted, because suddenly I wasn't looking at a family welcoming me in. I was looking at a system evaluating me, testing me, measuring how much I could be controlled, reduced, and contained. And in that silence, I understood something they didn't. I wasn't the one being invited into their world for approval. I was the one they thought they were about to take control of. But what they didn't know was that I was never there to ask for their acceptance in the first place. I met him at a charity event I almost didn't attend. It was one of those nights where everything looks expensive but feels empty. Crystal glasses, quiet laughter, people speaking in polished sentences that didn't really say anything. I remember standing near the edge of the room, already thinking about leaving, when he appeared beside me like he had stepped out of a different world entirely. He didn't feel like the others. While everyone around him carried that same polished distance, he felt grounded, relaxed, like he didn't need to perform for the room to accept him. When he spoke, it wasn't rehearsed or measured. It was simple, direct, real. And when I asked him what he did, he didn't inflate it, he didn't name drop. He didn't try to impress me. He just said he hated what money did to people. That caught me off guard more than anything else, because in his world, that kind of sentence wasn't common. Everyone around us was either chasing status or protecting it, but he spoke about wealth like it was noise, like it was something he had already seen too much of to care about anymore. He told me he wanted something normal, something honest, something real. And for someone like me who built everything from scratch and was constantly surrounded by people pretending to be more than they were, that honesty felt like safety. We started seeing each other soon after that night, fast, not reckless but natural in a way that made me stop questioning it. Conversations turned into long nights turned into trust. Trust turned into something I started calling love without even realizing when it happened. He listened in a way people rarely do. He remembered small details. He made me feel like I wasn't competing for space in his life, like I already had it, but there was always something he avoided: his family. Every time I brought it up, there was a reason, a delay, a distraction, a not yet. He made it sound like protection, like he was shielding me from something unnecessary, something complicated, and I believed him. So I stopped asking. Instead, I started building around him, around us. I paid attention to what he liked. I adjusted my schedule. I made room where there wasn't room before. I didn't notice how naturally the effort shifted onto me, how slowly I became the one holding things together, planning things, remembering things. Even the wedding planning somehow became my responsibility without ever being officially placed on my shoulders. He would smile and say I was better at it, more organized, more capable, and I would accept it as a compliment. I didn't see it then, but I was slowly becoming the structure that held his life in place while he stayed effortlessly at the center of it. At the time, it felt like love, like stability. Like I had finally found someone who didn't want to compete with me, but simply exist with me. But I didn't realize I wasn't stepping into a partnership. I was stepping into a system that had already learned how to guide me without my noticing. The first time I went to his family estate, I told myself I was just nervous. That's what I kept repeating in my head as the car turned off the main road and the world around us slowly changed. The streets got quieter, the houses got larger, and then, without warning, the road opened into something that didn't feel real anymore. The gates were massive, iron, heavy, silent. They didn't just open for us, they separated worlds, and the moment we crossed through them, it felt like we had left normal life behind. His hand tightened slightly on the steering wheel. That was the first time I noticed it. The first crack. He wasn't relaxed anymore. He wasn't the man I knew. The calm, grounded presence I had fallen for felt distant now, replaced by something smaller. Controlled, careful. "Don't worry," he said, but his voice didn't match the words. The driveway curved endlessly before the house finally came into view. Calling it a house felt wrong. It was an estate, cold stone, sharp architecture, everything designed to impress and intimidate at the same time. It didn't feel lived in, it felt displayed, like it existed to remind people where they stood. And I understood immediately where I stood. Below it, we barely stepped out of the car before the shift became even clearer. He straightened his posture instantly. His voice changed when he greeted the staff. Softer, more careful, like he was stepping into a role he had learned long ago. That was when I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think before. This version of him wasn't new, it was just hidden. His mother appeared at the top of the staircase like she had been waiting for us, without needing to be told when to arrive. She didn't walk down, she descended, slowly, as if the house itself carried her. And when her eyes landed on me, something in the air tightened. She didn't smile, she didn't greet me. She looked at me the way someone looks at a document they haven't decided to approve yet. "You're finally here," she said. But she didn't say it to me, she said it to him. And then she walked past me without stopping. No introduction, no acknowledgement, no name, just absence. That was my first real introduction to that family. His father was waiting in a room that felt more like a boardroom than a home. Long table, clean surfaces, controlled silence. Everything had order, but no warmth. He looked at me like I was part of a negotiation he hadn't agreed to yet. "So," he said slowly, "this is her, not my name. Not even a question, just a confirmation of existence." I remember sitting down, trying to keep my posture steady, while he began asking questions that didn't feel like curiosity. They felt like evaluation. "What do your parents do? Where did you study? What do you plan to contribute?" Contribute. Not what do you want in life. Not what makes you happy. Contribute. As if I had walked into a system where every person had a value that needed to be justified. I kept answering calmly, but something in me was starting to feel out of place, like I had entered a conversation that was already happening long before I arrived. And the worst part wasn't their tone. It was his silence. He sat beside me, but he didn't step in once. Not when his mother corrected me. Not when his father questioned me. Not when my answers were met with those long pauses that felt like judgment. The man who used to feel like certainty had become something else entirely in that room. He wasn't my partner there. He was their son. And I was suddenly reminded that I had never really known him outside of that role. As the evening went on, the way they referred to me started changing in small ways. "She" instead of my name. "Your friend" instead of "your fiancé." Little removals. Small erasures that added up faster than I could respond to them. I started smiling more than I spoke. Not because I was happy, because I didn't know where else to put myself in that conversation. After that night, things didn't suddenly become obvious. They became subtle. He started forgetting small things: payments for venues, deposits for vendors, shared accounts that somehow always ended with me covering the difference, just this once. At first, I didn't question it. I told myself he was busy, distracted, under pressure from his family, and I compensated. Because that's what people do when they care, right? They help, they support. They step in when the other person is overwhelmed. So I stepped in more and more, until I was no longer sure where support ended and imbalance began. What I didn't notice was how naturally it started to tilt. I paid for deposits without hesitation. I covered expenses without discussion. I signed off on things because it was easier than waiting. And every time I did, he would smile like everything was fine. Like I was doing exactly what I was supposed to do. Meanwhile, something inside me slowly began to shift. Not toward anger, not yet, toward confusion, then doubt, then something more dangerous: self-blame. Because when things didn't add up, I didn't immediately question him. I questioned myself. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I wasn't as patient as I should be. And that was how it started, not with betrayal, but with quiet, invisible imbalance that I kept explaining away, until I stopped recognizing which part of it was real. By the time the wedding planning really took over our lives, I stopped thinking of it as our wedding. It was just mine. That realization didn't hit all at once. It came slowly, through small absences, small silences, small responsibilities that somehow always landed in my hands. The vendors knew me better than they knew him. The florist called me directly. The venue coordinator stopped asking for his confirmation and started saying, "I'll just update you, Riley." At first, I told myself it made sense. He was busy. His family was involved in other arrangements. He was dealing with things I didn't fully understand yet. So I handled it: deposits, contracts, scheduling, final approvals. It became routine, almost automatic. And somewhere in that routine, I stopped noticing that I was the only one actually holding the entire structure together. The first real crack didn't feel dramatic. It felt like inconvenience. I was on a call with the caterer when she mentioned the payment didn't go through. Her voice was polite, almost apologetic, like she had seen this kind of thing before and didn't want to make it awkward. "I'm sorry," she said. "The joint account payment was declined." I remember pausing mid-sentence. Declined. That word didn't belong in our life, not in the way I understood it. We had planned for everything. I had personally ensured the account had more than enough buffer for any upcoming payments, so I laughed slightly, thinking it was a system issue. "I'll check it," I said calmly. I hung up and opened the banking app. That was the moment everything shifted. Because the numbers didn't just look wrong, they looked erased. The balance wasn't low, it was almost gone. I stared at the screen longer than I want to admit, waiting for it to make sense. Waiting for some explanation to appear if I just kept looking at it long enough. But it didn't. Instead, I saw a list of transactions, small ones at first, then larger, then frequent enough that the pattern became impossible to ignore. Withdrawals I didn't authorize, transfers I didn't recognize, payments going to accounts that weren't linked to anything I had set up. And all of it happening quietly, systematically, like someone had been slowly draining the foundation beneath everything I thought we were building. My first instinct wasn't anger, it was confusion, because this didn't match the version of reality I had been living in. So I did what I always did when things didn't make sense. I looked for him. He was in the living room when I found him, relaxed, scrolling through his phone like nothing in the world was wrong. Like the air between us hadn't just changed. "Did you move money from the wedding account?" I asked. My voice was steady, too steady. He didn't even look up at first. "Yeah," he said casually, like I had asked something trivial. "I had to cover something. Temporary issue. I'll fix it." I remember blinking slowly. "Temporary issue?" I repeated. He finally looked at me then, and there was something in his expression that didn't match concern. It matched irritation. "Riley, it's just finances," he said. "You're making it bigger than it is." That sentence should have calmed me. Instead, it did the opposite. Because he wasn't explaining, he was dismissing, and there is a difference you only understand once you've been on the receiving end of both. I stood there for a moment, waiting for more detail, waiting for something that resembled logic, but he had already moved on, like the conversation was closed. That night, I went back into the account again. And this time, I didn't just look at the withdrawals, I followed them, one after another, layer after layer. And what I found wasn't random. It wasn't panic spending. It wasn't a mistake. It was structured, controlled, intentional. Money wasn't just disappearing. It was being moved, redirected, filtered through accounts I didn't recognize but could trace if I dug deep enough. And the deeper I looked, the clearer it became that this wasn't happening in isolation. It had been happening for a while. I just hadn't been paying attention, because I had trusted the system, and I had trusted him. The next day, I tried to keep things normal. I told myself I needed to be calm before I confronted anything again. I needed clarity, not emotion. So I continued with the wedding tasks like nothing had changed. That's when the next call came. The florist. Her voice was different this time, less polite, more hesitant. "Riley," she said carefully, "I tried running the payment again, but it's still coming back declined." Something tightened in my chest. "That's not possible," I said immediately. "I checked the account yesterday." There was a pause. A long one. "Can you just confirm the payment method again?" she asked softly. I was already opening the app while she spoke. And then I saw it. Empty. Not just low, empty. Like someone had gone through everything and left nothing behind. My hand went cold. I checked again, refreshed, logged out, logged back in, still empty. And that was the moment my brain finally stopped trying to explain it away. I didn't even finish the call properly. I just hung up, grabbed my keys and drove straight home. He was there. Same place, same posture, same calm expression, almost like he was waiting. "What happened to the account?" I asked. This time my voice wasn't steady. It was controlled. He sighed like I was exhausting him. "It's just timing," he said. "Transfers and fees, investments. You don't need to worry about it." But I was already looking at him differently now. Because I had seen the pattern, and patterns don't lie the way people do. "Where did it go?" I asked again. He finally stood up slowly, like he was trying to manage the conversation rather than answer it. "Riley," he said, softer now, "you're overreacting. It's handled. I told you I'll fix it." But he didn't say how. He didn't say when, and he didn't look me in the eyes when he said it. That was the turning point. Not the missing money, not the account, not even the lies. It was the realization that he was no longer trying to explain reality to me. He was trying to control how much of it I was allowed to see. And for the first time, I understood something I had been avoiding for a long time. This wasn't confusion anymore. It wasn't miscommunication. It wasn't stress or pressure or bad timing. It was control, quiet, systematic, and already in motion long before I noticed it. After that night at the estate, something inside me stopped trying to explain things in emotional terms. Because emotion was no longer helping me understand reality. I started doing what I had always done when something didn't make sense. I started looking at the data. At first, I told myself it was just anxiety, that I was overreacting to a stressful situation. People always say weddings bring pressure and families can be difficult. And maybe I had just experienced one bad night. But deep down, I already knew the truth was not going to soften itself just because I needed it to. The first thing I checked was simple. The financial arrangement around our shared life. Not because I was suspicious at first, but because I was confused. There was a shared account we had set up for wedding expenses. I had been the one who initially funded it. $50,000 from my side. Daniel had said he would ship. He had said it casually, confidently, like it was already done, like it was nothing. But now I wanted to confirm it. I logged in. The interface loaded slowly, and for a moment I remember just sitting there staring at the screen like it might change if I waited long enough. It didn't. The balance was not just lower than expected. It was almost empty. At first, my mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe payments had gone out, maybe vendors had been paid, maybe things were already being processed for the wedding. But when I opened the transaction history, that explanation collapsed instantly, because it wasn't wedding payments, it was withdrawals. Multiple, small ones at first, then larger, then structured in a way that didn't look random at all. It looked intentional. There were cash withdrawals I didn't recognize, transfers to accounts I had never seen before, and then there were charges that made no sense in the context of our wedding planning at all. My breathing slowed, not because I was calm, but because my body was trying to process something my mind was refusing to accept. I remember sitting there thinking one sentence over and over again. This doesn't make sense. But the more I looked, the more I understood that the problem wasn't confusion. It was design. Someone had designed this. I closed the laptop for a moment, not because I was done, but because I needed distance from what I was seeing in order to keep going. When Daniel walked in later that evening, I didn't confront him immediately. I watched him first. That's something people don't talk about. When trust starts breaking, you don't always explode. Sometimes you observe. He acted normal, too normal, like nothing in the world had shifted, like we weren't standing on completely different ground now. I asked him casually about the account, about a payment issue I had noticed. He didn't even hesitate. He smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a guilty smile, a practiced one. And he said there must be a delay, some banking issue, some temporary financial fluctuation. He even laughed lightly when he said it, like it was nothing, like money disappearing from our wedding fund was the same as a delayed delivery order. And in that moment, I noticed something I had missed before. He wasn't surprised that I had checked. He was prepared for it. That realization didn't come as a shock. It came as confirmation. I stopped arguing, not because I believed him, but because I had moved past the need for verbal truth. I needed structural truth now. Over the next several days, I started going deeper. I looked at everything I could access: shared expenses, payment histories, property listings, public filings, not because I wanted to invade his privacy, but because I needed to understand the system I had stepped into, and what I found did not feel like a relationship anymore. It felt like an ecosystem, a controlled one. The first major discovery came from the condo, the place he had always referred to as his, the place we were living in, the place I had been paying utilities for without questioning it. I ran the property record, and the name that came up was not his. It was a trust, a family trust, structured, layered, legally protected, and designed in a way that made individual ownership almost meaningless. I remember staring at that screen for a long time, because it changed the entire foundation of what I thought I knew. If the condo wasn't his, then what else wasn't? I moved to his employment next. He had always described his role in vague but impressive terms: portfolio management, investment oversight, family firm responsibilities. The kind of language that sounds powerful if you don't look too closely. But when I checked the filings, the reality was very different. He wasn't a decision maker. He wasn't even close. He was listed in a junior capacity. A structured position, defined limits, clear oversight, no real autonomy. And then I saw the salary records attached to loan disclosures. It was not enough to support the lifestyle he was living. Not even close. The cars, the clothing, the condo, the dinners, the ease. None of it matched his actual financial output. Which meant only one thing: he wasn't sustaining his life, he was being sustained by someone else, by something larger, by a structure I had not been fully aware of until now. And suddenly, the illusion didn't just crack, it reorganized itself in front of me, because now I understood what I was actually looking at. Daniel was not a self-contained individual. He was an extension of a system, a controlled asset inside a larger family structure. And that meant every interaction I had with him, every promise, every reassurance, every financial decision, had never been independent. It had all been filtered, managed, approved somewhere else before it ever reached me. I leaned back in my chair and felt something shift inside my perception of reality. Not sadness yet, not anger, something colder, clarity, because now I could see the shape of what this actually was. I wasn't just in a relationship, I was inside an evaluation process, and I was not the evaluator. I was the subject. That realization changed the meaning of everything. The delays in introducing me to his parents, the avoidance, the controlled exposure, the carefully staged first meeting, the way I had been observed rather than welcomed. It wasn't social awkwardness, it wasn't family tension, it was assessment. And I had passed or failed without ever being told I was being graded. The financial dependency I had started absorbing without noticing suddenly made sense in a different way too. The way I had been slowly covering expenses. The way responsibility had shifted toward me without resistance. The way my resources had quietly become part of the system. It wasn't accidental, it was structural absorption, a slow integration. And I had walked into it believing it was partnership. But partnership implies equality. This was not equality. This was acquisition. I closed every tab on my laptop slowly, not because I was done looking, but because I had seen enough to understand the direction of everything. And once you understand the direction, you don't need every detail anymore. You just need to decide what you are going to do with the truth. I sat in silence for a long time after that, because the emotional part of me was still trying to catch up, still trying to find a version of this story where it was misunderstanding, where it was miscommunication, where it was fixable, but the analytical part of me had already moved on. It had already labeled the situation, and the label was simple: controlled system, not relationship, not mistake, system. And inside that system, I had only one remaining unanswered question. Not why is this happening, not how did I miss it, but something much more precise, something much more important. What exactly am I being prepared for? And for the first time since I met Daniel, I realized I was no longer looking for love. I was looking for the next move in a game I had just realized I was already losing. 3 days before the wedding, I received the call. It came in the middle of a quiet afternoon that had no reason to feel different from any other day. But somehow, I already knew it would be different. Catherine's voice was calm when she spoke. Too calm. There was no warmth in it, no invitation in the traditional sense. It was structured, controlled, like every word had already been chosen and approved before it ever reached me. She said Arthur and she would like to see us. Just final paperwork, she added, those 2 words again. Final paperwork. I had learned by now that in their world nothing was ever just anything, but I still agreed, not because I trusted the situation, but because I wanted to see it clearly, not imagined, not assumed, but fully revealed. When we arrived at the estate, the atmosphere felt different from the first time. Not louder, not more intimidating, more focused. Like the space itself understood what was about to happen. The gates opened slowly as we approached, and the long driveway stretched ahead like a controlled corridor leading somewhere unavoidable. Daniel didn't speak much during the drive. He didn't have to. His silence had already become familiar to me. Not peaceful silence, not thoughtful silence, avoidant silence. The kind that exists when someone knows the truth is approaching, but hopes it will pass without requiring them to participate. When we entered the house, the feeling was immediate. This was not a family meeting. This was a structured assembly. Arthur was already seated at the head of the long marble table. Catherine sat beside him. Perfect posture, perfect expression, perfect stillness. Daniel followed behind me, but didn't walk beside me this time. He didn't guide me. He didn't support me. He simply took his seat like someone waiting for instructions. And that told me everything I needed to know before a single word was spoken. There were no greetings, no small talk, no emotional framing. Arthur gestured once toward the table, and a leather-bound folder was placed in front of me. Gold embossed, heavy, deliberate, not a document, a statement. Catherine spoke first. Her voice was smooth, precise, and completely detached from emotion. She said this was standard, a formality, something every responsible family in their position would require. Arthur added that it was for protection, for structure, for clarity, but as I opened the folder, I understood immediately that none of those words were accurate. This was not protection. Protection is mutual. This was unilateral control. The pages were dense. Legal language layered with financial conditions that were not designed to clarify a relationship, but to define its limits. And those limits were not balanced. They were restrictive. Clause by clause, I began reading. The first clause addressed property. Anything shared during the marriage would remain exclusively under the Harrison family structure. Even if I contributed financially, even if I maintained it, even if I paid for it. My contribution would not translate into ownership, only access, temporary, conditional access. The second clause addressed future assets, any growth of wealth, inheritance, or investment structures connected to Daniel would remain entirely separate from me. No claims, no rights, no exceptions. It didn't matter what I built alongside him. I would never be included in what he already had. The third clause was more aggressive in tone. Confidentiality. Absolute silence regarding the Harrison family, their financial structure, their business dealings, and even the existence of internal arrangements. Violation carried penalties so severe they were not proportional. They were deterrent-based, designed to ensure silence, not fairness. The number attached to it was not symbolic. It was strategic. It was meant to remind me that speaking would cost more than staying quiet ever would. And then came the final clause, the one that revealed everything. In the event of dissolution of the marriage for any reason, I would be entitled to a fixed settlement, a single payment, defined in advance, non-negotiable, insultingly precise, not based on contribution, not based on time, not based on circumstance, just a number, a price. And when I read it, I understood something I hadn't fully understood before. They were not planning a marriage.